Sabina was a woman who turned heads. Wherever she went in her late 40s, she carried herself with the poise. Someone who knew the power she held over people. A widow for over a decade, she had mastered the art of manipulation, often cloaking her selfish desires under the guise of motherly concern. Her daughter, Amara, adored her, but often struggled to navigate the complex web of expectations Sabina drew around her. Amora, in her early 30s, was everything. Sabina prided herself on beautiful, intelligent, and a devoted wife, yet beneath Sabina's affectionate lay an undercurrent of jealousy, resentment she didn't dare admit even to herself. Amora had married for love, defying her mother's wish for a wealthier suitor. Her husband was ambitious, charming, and deeply in love with her. He worked hard to build a future for them, but his quiet confidence and strong moral compass clashed with Sabina's domineering nature. He respected Sabina as Amara's mother, but he couldn't ignore the subtle manipulations she employed to keep her daughter there too. Her Sabina, for her parts, turned as a rival for her daughter's attention and affection. A silent but unspoken battle brewing between them. Their lives took an unexpected turn when Sabina announced she was moving in. She had played her cards carefully, lamenting her loneliness and declining health to gain sympathy. Amora, ever the dutiful daughter, couldn't refuse. He hesitated, but eventually relented, not wanting to upset his wife. And so Sena arrived with her neatly packed bags and an unsettling air of permanence from the moment she entered their home. Sabina's presence was palpable. She offered unsolicited advice on everything from the way Amora cooked to how Tun managed their finances. "I'm just trying to help," she would say, her voice sweet, but her words often carried a sting that lingered. She insisted on being involved in every aspect of their lives, undermining Amara's confidence and creating a rift between the couple. Tun tried to maintain his composure, but the constant interference grated on him. Sabina had a knack for showing up at the most inconvenient times, turning private moments into awkward interruptions. Amora, caught in the middle, felt torn between her loyalty to her mother and her duty as a wife. Sabina's dominance began to strain their once loving relationship, and the cracks were starting to show. The tension reached a new height one evening when Sabina casually mentioned that seemed too busy for his wife, planting a seed of doubt in Amora's mind. Later, Shikona turned with a knowing smile. "You're a good man," she said, her hand lingering on his arm a moment too long. He pulled away, brushing it off as harmless, but something about her tone unsettled him. Unbeknown to both Amora and Sabina was just getting started. Sabina wasted no time weaving herself into Amora and Tan's life. From the outside, her actions seemed innocent, a mother staying with her daughter and offering help, but beneath her smiling for her, Sabina's true intentions were brewing. She knew how to sow seeds of doubt, how to manipulate with precision, and she began her campaign with subtle criticisms. "Amora, darling, you're such a good wife," Sabina said one evening as the family sat down for dinner, "but don't you think Tun deserves a little more effort? Maybe some fancier meals. Men work so hard, you know." The comment was cloaked in sweetness, but the implication was sharp. Tun glanced at Amara, hesitant to agree, but the seed was planted. Over the days that followed, Sena continued the small digs, questioning Amora's housekeeping skills, suggesting her outfits were too casual, and even remarking on her lack of attentiveness. Though initially dismissive, began to notice the flaw. Sabina sly pointed out. Sabina didn't stop there. She shifted her focus to using charm and wit to create a bond that felt effortless and natural. "You're such a hard-working man," she said one afternoon as he returned from work. "Amora is lucky to have you. I hope she appreciates everything you do." Her words carried a warmth that made Tun feel acknowledged in a way he hadn't realized he craved. Sabina listened intently when he talked about his day, laughed at his jokes, and always seemed genuinely Interested in his opinions, slowly she began feeling gaps he didn't even know existed, making him feel seen and understood in ways Amora had unintentionally overlooked. Her moves were small but calculated. Sabina started invading their personal space in ways that seemed trivial but were deliberate. She would insist on sitting next to T during family movie nights, hide brushing his accidentally. She dressed in outfits that were more revealing than one might expect from a mother-in-law, claiming they were simply comfortable and harmless. When Amara was busy, Sabina volunteered to accompany T on errands, creating scenarios where they were alone together. These moments were filled with light-hearted bound, her laughter a little too genuine, her touches a little too familiar. T felt uneasy at times, but he convinced himself it was harmless, a motherly figure being overly friendly. Meanwhile, Amara was beginning to notice. At first she brushed off the small signs, her mother's lingering glances at T, the way she touched his shoulder during conversations, the way T seemed more withdrawn around her lately. But as these incidents grew more frequent, Amora's discomfort turned into suspicion. One evening, she confronted Sabina directly. "Mom, I've noticed the way you act around T," Amara said, her voice shaky but firm. "It's strange you're too involved." Sabina's response was quick and defensive. "Amora, how can you even think that?" she said, "Fing hurt. I'm just trying to be helpful. You know how much I care about your marriage. If you're feeling insecure, that's something you need to walk on with." Amora's heart sounds. Sabina had turned the tables, making her feel irrational for doubting her mother's intentions. Turned when Amora shared her concerns with him later that night, dismissed them as overthinking. "She's your mother, Amora," he said. "She just wants to help. Don't let small things get to you." Sabina continued her subtle campaign, emboldened by the lack of consequences. She began timing her comments and actions to undermine Amar further. When Amar failed to meet T's expectations, whether it was a slightly overcooked dinner or forgetting a task, Sana was quick to remark, "Don't worry. Not everyone is perfect, Amora." "Still learning," those said with a smile. The underlying critique was clear. Turned already stressed from walk, started noticing Amora's mistakes more than her efforts. The tension in the household grew. Amora felt increasingly isolated, cut between her husband's dismissiveness and her mother's manipulative charm. Turned, on the other hand, was toward he cared deeply for Amora, but couldn't ignore the ease and comfort he found in Sana's company. He didn't recognize it for what it was, carefully crafted manipulation, but it began to cloud his perception of his wife. Unbeknownst to Amora, Sana's true intentions were becoming more apparent. One evening, as Tan sat in the living room, Sabina leaned in a little too close, her hand resting on his arm. "T, I know you work so hard for this family," she said softly. "Sometimes I feel like Amora doesn't appreciate you the way she should." Her voice was laced with sympathy, and for a brief moment Tan felt a pang of agreement. Amora's growing suspicion clashed with Tan's denial, creating cracks in their marriage. And Sabina, watching the tension unfold, knew she was just getting started. Sabina had always been a master of emotional manipulation, but her charm worked best when she painted herself as the victim. She knew Tan was a proud, ambitious man who loved his wife deeply. But even the strongest men, she believed, had cracks in their armor, and it was through those cracks that she planned to enter. In the weeks since she moved in, Ina had skillfully planted seeds of doubt in Tan's mind about Amora's suitor, remarks about her daughter's supposed shortcomings, her cooking, her attentiveness, even her ability to keep a man happy, began to chip away at his perception of their perfect marriage. But she knew words alone once enough. T needed to feel special, and she was more than willing to oblige. One evening, as State returned from a particularly grueling day at work, Sana greeted him with her most radiant smile. "You look exhausted." "Turned," she said, handing him a glass of water before he could even ask. "Amora should really take better care of you. You deserve to come home to peace, and comfort turned too tired to argue. Muttered a polite thanks and sat down. Sabina seized the moment to sit beside him. You remind me so much of my late husband, she said softly, her voice tinged with nostalgia. Strong, determined, always putting the family first. Men like you are rare. Turned Amora is lucky, so very lucky too. Have you? Her words lingered in his mind. Long after she left the room, they were simple enough, yet they struck a chord. Ton felt seen and appreciated in a way that had become rare in his relationship with Amora, who was often distracted by her own stresses. Sabina continued to build on this foundation over the following days, offering compliments, sharing personal stories about her sacrifices for Amora, and always being there with a listening ear when Ton needed it most. She became his confidant, someone who understood the pressures he faced without judgment. It was a rainy evening when Sabina saw her opportunity. Amara had gone to visit a friend in a neighboring town and wasn't expected back until late the next day. The storm outside made the house feel colder than usual, and Sabina used it to her advantage, creating an intimate atmosphere. She lit candles, claiming the power might go out, and prepared a bottle of wine, saying it was to keep warm. When Ton returned home drenched from the rain, she greeted him with a towel and a warm smile. You catch a cod like that, she said, draping the towel over his shoulders. Sit down, let me take care of you. He hesitated, but eventually sat, letting her pour him a glass of wine. Sabina sat across from him, her eyes never leaving his face. You work so hard. Turn, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't think anyone truly understands the sacrifices you make. Not even Amar. T shifted uncomfortably. Amar does her best, he replied, but his tone lacked conviction. Of course she does, Sabina said quickly, leaning forward, but sometimes I feel like she doesn't see you the way I do. You're an incredible man, tend handsome, strong, intelligent. You deserve so much more than just the best she can do. The compliment caught him off guard, and he felt a strange warmth creeping up his neck. He downed his glass of wine to avoid meeting her gaze. Sabina refilled it immediately as the evening wore on. Sana stirred the conversation toward her own life, recounting tales of loneliness and sacrifice. She spoke of the struggles she faced after her husband's death, how she had poured everything into raising Amora, only to feel abundant now. Sometimes I wonder if anyone will ever truly see me again, she said, her voice breaking slightly. Turned, his inhibitions lowered by the wine and the storm outside, felt a pan of sympathy. You're a wonderful woman, Sabina, he said. Any man would be lucky to have you. Sabina smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. Do you really mean that? She asked, moving closer to him. Her hand rested lightly on his arm, her touch warm and deliberate. It's been so long since someone made me feel sinned. He froze, his heart pounding. He knew he should pull away, but the vulnerability in her eyes held him captive before he could process what was happening. Sabina leaned in, her lips brushing against his. It was a fleeting touch, but it was enough to shatter his resolve. The storm outside roared, drowning out the sound of his whisper protest as she closed the gap between them. The next morning, Ton woke with a sinking feeling in his chest. The events of the previous night replayed in his mind like a nightmare. Sabina had already prepared breakfast, her demeanor and unbothered. She greeted him with a smile, as if nothing had happened. He avoided her gaze, barely touching his food. Guilt gnawed at him, but he couldn't bring himself to speak. The shame of his betrayal weighed heavily on him, and the thought of confessing to Amora was unbearable. Sabina, sensing his discomfort, placed a hand on his shoulder. Relax. Turn, she said, her voice soothing. Last night it was just a moment. It doesn't have to mean anything, but it does. Ton said, his voice trembling. It was wrong. Sabina tilted her head, her smile unwavering. Maybe, but it's a little secret now, isn't it? There's no need to hurt Amora over one mistake. Her words were meant to reassure him, but they felt Like a new tightening around his neck, he nodded reluctantly, desperate to put distance between them over the next few days. Ton tried to avoid Sabina as much as possible, but she made it impossible. She continued to act as though nothing had changed, but her words carried an undercurrent of threat. You know, she said one evening Amara would be devastated if she thought you didn't love her anymore. Imagine how she'd be if she thought you were keeping secret from her. Ton realized with growing dread that Sabina wasn't just brushing the incident under the rug, she was using it to control him. Every time he tried to pull away, she found a way to reel him back in. Her smiles laced with subtle reminders of their shared guilt. He wanted to confess, to tell Amar everything and beg for her forgiveness, but the fear of destroying their marriage held him back. Sabina, meanwhile, watched him unravel with quiet satisfaction, knowing she had him exactly where she wanted. The once happy home was now a house of secrets, with Tom caught in Sena's web and Amor oblivious to the storm brewing around her. But Sabina wasn't finished yet. She had set the trap, and Ton had fallen into it. Now it was only a matter of time before the cracks in their fragile facade began to show. Sabina had always been a woman driven by deep insecurities hidden beneath a confident exterior. Years of failed relationships had left her bitter and envious, especially of her daughter Amora. In her mind, Amora represented everything. She couldn't have a devoted husband, a loving marriage, and a promising future. Sabina's jealousy grew like a dark shadow, feeding on her own failures and a twisted desire to prove her dominance over Amora. To her, sabotaging her daughter's happiness wasn't just an act of spite, it was a way to reclaim her lost power. In the weeks following the incident with Ton, Sena's manipulation grew bolder. She began spreading rumors in their community, painting Amora as neglectful and unfaithful. At church, she whispered to a neighbor, "I love my daughter, but sometimes I worry about her priorities. T works so hard, and she hardly seems to notice." At social gatherings, she dropped vague but damaging hint: marriage is secret, but not everyone takes it as seriously as they should. These rumors began to take root, especially as Sena carefully cultivated sympathy for herself. She portrayed herself as the dutiful mother living with a struggling couple, doing her best to hold the family together. The community, unaware of her true nature, began to see Amar in a different light. Friends who once admired her began to keep their distance, unsure of what to believe. Sabina, meanwhile, watched with satisfaction as Amora's reputation started to crumble at home. The tension was palpable. Amora sensed that something was off but couldn't quite put her finger on it. Ton had grown distant, avoiding her gaze and coming up with excuses to stay late at work. Sena's presence felt oppressive, her every action calculated to drive a wedge deeper between husband and wife. One evening, Amara stumbled upon a conversation between Sabina and T that sent alarm bells ringing. She had been walking toward the kitchen when she heard Sena's voice, low and insistent. "T, you know I'm only looking out for you," she said. "Amora doesn't understand what a man like you needs. You deserve better." T's response was muffled, but the tone of the exchange was enough to leave Amora frozen in place. She couldn't hear the full context, but something about it felt deeply wrong. Later, as she cleaned the living room, she noticed more out-of-place items: a wine glass she hadn't used, a scarf tripped over the back of a chair that wasn't hers. The pieces didn't fit, but they pointed toward a disturbing possibility. Her suspicions reached a boiling point when she found one of Sabina's earrings under the couch in the guest room. It was the same earring Sab had worn the night Amara was out visiting a friend. Confronting T felt inevitable. She approached him that evening, her heart pounding. "Turn," she began, her voice trembling. "Is there something you're not telling me about my mother?" T froze, his guilt written all over his face. He tried to deny it, at first stumbling over his words, but Amora's piercing gaze broke him. "Amar, I'm so sorry," he whispered, tears welling in His eyes, it was a mistake, Aishisena. Manipulated me, I didn't mean for it to happen. Amara felt the word crumble. Around her, the weight of his words crushed her chest, leaving her breathless. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her husband, the man she trusted above all, had betrayed her with her own mother. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal left her reeling. How could you, she said, her voice breaking. How could either of you do this to me? He reached for her, but she pulled away, her anger and heart boiling over. Don't touch me, she said sharply. I need time to think. For days, Amora wrestled with her emotions. The betrayal was too much to bear, yet the love she still felt for Tun complicated everything. Leaving him seemed like the only option, but a part of her wanted answers, wanted to confront the person who had orchestrated this devastation. When Amar finally confronted Sabina, it was like a storm unleashed. She found her mother in the living room, calmly sipping tea as though nothing had happened. You have some nerve, Amara said, her voice shaking with rage. After everything I've done for you, after letting you into my home, this is how you repay me. Sena didn't flinch. Instead, she sat down her teacup and looked at Amora with an unsettling calmness. You've always been so dramatic, Amara, she said. Do you really think this is all my fault? There's a grown man, he made his choices. Amora's eyes filled with tears, but her anger burned brighter. You manipulated him. You've been trying to destroy my marriage since the day you moved in. Why, what did I ever do to you? For the first time, says Fakad, cracked. Do you know what it's like to give your entire life to someone and watch them surpass you, to watch them have everything you never have? She sparked. You're so perfect, Amara, your marriage, your life. It's all so easy for you. I wanted to show you that you're not untouchable. Amar stared at her mother in disbelief. You're sick, she said, her voice barely a whisper. You're jealous of your own daughter. You ruined my life because of your insecurities. Sabina's expression hardened. Maybe now you'll understand that the word isn't as perfect as you think, she said coldly. People aren't perfect, not even you. Amara turned and walked away, tears streaming down her face. Her mother's words echoed in her mind, but she refused to let them define her. She knew she had a choice to make, a choice that would determine the future of her marriage and her own happiness. Sabina's downfall began quietly but swiftly. After her confrontation with stunned Amora knew that exposing her mother's actions was the only way to reclaim her dignity and begin to heal. She invited her extended family and close friends to a gathering at their home under the pretense of addressing a family matter. Sabina, unaware of Amora's plan, arrived with her usual air of confidence, completely oblivious to the storm about to unfold. Once everyone was seated, Amora stood in the center of the room, her voice trembling but resolute. There's something I need to share with all of you, she began, her eyes briefly to her mother, who gave her a reassuring smile, still assuming she controlled the narrative. Amora didn't hold back. She revealed everything: the manipulation, the rumors Sena had spread, and most shockingly, the betrayal. With gas filled the room as Amara described how her mother had systematically undermined her marriage out of jealousy and spite. Sabina's smile faded, her composure cracking as the weight of her actions became public knowledge. Your line, Sena interjected, her voice sharp and defensive. Why did I ever do something like that to my own daughter? But Amora had come prepared. She presented evidence, witnesses who had overheard Sabina's disparaging remarks, details about the night she seduced on, and even the earring. Amara had found the room turned against Sabina as the truth unraveled. Relatives who had once admired her for her strength and resilience now looked at her with disgust. Tun stood up. Next, his face was heavy with shame, but his voice was clear. What Amora is saying is true, he confessed. I allowed myself to be manipulated, and I betrayed my wife. There is no excuse for my actions, and I take full responsibility for the pain I've caused. He turned to Amora, tears In his eyes, "I'm sorry, Amora, I will spend the rest of my life trying to earn your forgiveness." Sabina, now conned and humiliated, tried to save face. "You're all turning against me over one mistake," she sneered, her voice tinged with desperation. "I gave everything to this family. I don't deserve this," but no one defended her. Her words fell on deaf ears, and the room slowly emptied as her once loyal supporters walked away disgusted by the person they now saw her to be. As the dust settled, Sena found herself alone in the house that had once felt like hers. She stared at the empty chairs, the weight of her isolation sinking in. Her daughter had banished her family, had ostracized her, and even turned the man she thought she could control had turned against her. Sitting in the quiet, Sena reflected on her actions, but her expression remained unreadable. There was no regret in her eyes, only a flicker of bitterness and loneliness. For Sabina, change was unlikely. The wounds she had inflicted would never fully heal, and the legacy of her jealousy would haunt her forever. The aftermath of Sabina's betrayal left Amora and Tan's marriage on fragile ground. Trust had been shattered, and the pain lingered like a heavy fog in their home. However, both were determined to salvage what remained. At Amora's insistence, the couple sought professional counseling, where they began the long and painful process of addressing the wounds Sabina had inflicted. Through these sessions, Tan confronted the guilt that had consumed him, while Amora grappled with her anger and heartbreak. Slowly but surely, they started to rebuild their bond. Tan took active steps to prove his loyalty to Amara. He cut off all contact with Sabina and committed himself fully to their healing, whether it was small gestures like helping Amora with daily tasks, or larger efforts like planning a surprise getaway to re-enter their relationship. T walked tirelessly to regain her trust. Amora, though hesitant at first, began to see his sincerity. The cracks in their marriage, while still visible, became a foundation for newfound honesty and resilience. Amora also underwent a personal transformation. For years, she had lived under her mother's shadow, trying to please Sabina and meet her impossible expectations. This betrayal, painful as it was, forced Amora to reevaluate her priorities. She realized that her own happiness and independence mattered more than the approval of someone who had only sought to control her. One afternoon, Amara made a decision that had been building within her since the truth came to light. She visited Sabina's new home, standing firm as her mother tried to apologize and justify her actions. "I forgive you," Amora said, her voice calm but resolute. "But forgiveness doesn't mean I'll allow you back into my life. I need to protect myself and my marriage." Walking away from that encounter, Amora felt a weight lift from her shoulders. For the first time, she was free from her mother's manipulations and the guilt that had tied her to a toxic relationship. The story ended not with perfect resolution, but with growth and strength. Amora and Tan's journey was a testament to the power of forgiveness and the importance of setting boundaries. Through betrayal, they had learned what truly mattered: love, honesty, and the courage to start again. If you enjoy, please subscribe our channel for more African tales and stories.